So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Seminar 6 in our series, Games and Play. I'm very excited to have Prof. Gilson Schwartz with us this afternoon from University of Sfio Paulo. He's one of the main players in Games for Change in Latin America, which explores how to kind of harness gamification as a force for good. So for him, our main challenge and our opportunity is to ensure that we're not just designing kind of good games, but building systems that genuinely advance the sustainable development goals. So he's going to talk to us today about the really important difference between gaming and gamification in the context of the SDGs. As he points out, gaming isn't about playing games at all. It's about playing the system. It's when kind of metrics are massaged and narratives are polished and progress is simulated rather than achieved. So you can think of it as impact washing, ticking boxes, producing impressive sounding data, but ultimately sidestepping real change. So it erodes trust and weakens the very institutions that are meant to develop the sustainable outcomes. And then he tells us that gamification, sorry, on the other hand, is something quite different, far more promising. It's about using the dynamics of games, of feedback loops and challenges and collaboration and all that stuff to engage people in really meaningful action. So this distinction matters very much because the very same tools can inspire action, and they can also be used to kind of obscure inaction. You can use immersive and interactive systems to build empathy and systems thinking, but you can just as easily use it to train us to navigate and exploit these distorted metrics. So, since we ultimately want to create our own game for change, this is something I really want to know how to avoid. So thank you so much, Gilson, for taking time out of your really, I know, hectic schedule to talk to us. And I'll hand over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really amazing to be connecting with you and our fellows. And yes, thank you so much. So much. I hope this will be like a kickoff for our collaboration to move on. You've been to Brazil already. You know our team. And well, of course, I will start my presentation asking ChatGPT about what kind of person I am. That's a problem of identity. I have to make clear for you that I have a background, and I decided to ask this favor, my good friend ChatGPT. So yes, let me share. Wait a second. Share is here. Okay. So what I did, I simply asked ChatGPT, tell me about activities led by Gilson Schwartz related to games and social impact. Let's see what he says. I've read it. Seems to be accurate. Well, ChatGPT and all these AI interfaces, they have this tendency to please whoever asks them a favor. So he's very kind and saying that I'm one of the key figures in linking games, digital culture, and social impact in Brazil and Latin America, especially through academic, culture, and experimental platforms connected to the University of São Paulo. That's correct, except for the adjectives. His work sits at the intersection of game design, education, civic engagement, and alternative economies. And that's where I think is the key point I want to make, is the connection between what we are all engaged with. I created this neologism, economy. It's not an economy, but it's an economy That means, well, lots of things, and I'll be back to that concept of that neologism in a while. So here's a structure views of my main activities and initiatives. Well, first of all, as Andres already mentioned, I'm leading Games for Change Latin America for, oh my God, 15 years. Look what I got. It's like a trophy thing for 15 years. 18 years. I got this last year's annual Games for Change Festival in New York. You can read here. It's proof, a very solid proof that I am leading Games for Change Latin America for 15 years. Of course, it hasn't been an easy trip, but anyway, we are doing it. And of course, we promote serious games, so-called serious games, focused on education, sustainability, human rights, civic engagement. We've been doing annual festivals since 2011. Actually, we kicked off in 2010. So actually, it's like 16 years now. Game jams, we've done lots of game jams, participated in game jams, or creating our own game jams. I'll talk about this later on. Pitch for Change, we organized these competitions for startups and prototypes. That was really interesting. And some of them became partners. And, once you identify these partners and you start creating this community, it makes it much easier to develop, to create, and to make an impact. So we are bringing together developers, activists, educators, policymakers to design games with real-world impact. Core idea, ChatGPT is always very objective. There's a core idea here. Games are not just entertainment, they are tools for social transformation, policy experimentation, and collective learning. City of Knowledge, number 2. Yes, I created this project 25 years ago at the Institute of Advanced Studies. You see here how, it's not that precise. At the University of Sfio Pauloand, where? Well, this was founded as a research platform at the Institute of Advanced Studies back in 1999. It was a public call for projects, and I proposed that we develop the City of Knowledge, and it was selected. We started actually working in 2000, 2001, and then we launched this project in 2001 at the Institute of Advanced Studies. I stress that because this is very important from a political perspective, and it'll make it clearer as we move on why the Institute of Advanced Studies has been so important in my career, and the projects that we are leading right now is actually 26 years after creating this idea of a City of Knowledge. Well, mainly it says I pioneered, and it's an exaggeration, of course, always trying to please us. But anyway, actually, it is a collaborative digital knowledge production platform. And at that time, it was basically emails. And I was stressing knowledge production rather than information sharing. And after about 25 years, I still think that, when we talk about content production or information sharing, it's far, far away from what we would say is actual knowledge production. But I'll be back to that later as well. This city, so-called City of Knowledge, became the institutional base for Games for Change in Latin America since 2010. So we stress game design research and teaching, integration of games with education, public policy and creative industries, and experimental projects, combining games, audiovisual, and networks. In 2005, I'll be back to that timeline in a moment. This is where the concept of economy emerges, treating symbolic, cultural, and digital assets, including games, as economic drivers. That's the main point. That's the thing that I've been working on, both from a technological perspective, as well as an economic perspective, and then in the horizon of the humanities. We've been doing festivals, game jams, Latin American game jams, workshops, labs, and here we come to the main point right now. That's the UAIFAI platform, and the Quilombo Inteligente as emerging ecosystems. After 25 years, lots of failures, of course. We've been working as our community realized that we were lagging behind, not only because technological development is so fast and accelerating, but also because the bureaucracy, all the political issues that you have to face when you are a university professor are so demanding and so stressing. So we realized we needed, as a community, we needed to develop something new that would catch up with technological development, as well as create some kind of political autonomy, well, in a certain sense. It's not total autonomy, but some sort of independence. Well, something in there, in between, being a university professor and being actually a social entrepreneur. So Wi-Fi, universes of access to imagination, fantasy, and the arts of the economy. So again, you can trust ChatGPT. It just dropped out the economy thing here. That's the final I. This final I is about the arts of the economy. So how do we prepare ourselves to create accessible, open universes? Not the proprietary systems that we are being subject to, but open and diverse universes of access to these capacities or faculties. Using a Kantian term, our faculties of imagination. What's the connection between our sensory or perceptive experience and our access to knowledge-producing processes? Well, that requires a lot of imagination. That's nothing new. We know since Kant, at least, not only Kant, but I like to stress Kant because it's so important in everything that we're discussing related to intelligence, cognition, cognitive science, and things like that. So where is our imagination? Where is our capacity to deal with fantasy? And of course, what's the role of arts in all this? So Wi-Fi, of course, playing with the Wi-Fi network, that is a maybe utopian proposal of us creating a global and locally anchored ecosystem where we share and we open different forms of access to imagination, fantasy, and the arts as a precondition, as a requisite for a more sustainable life. So, of course, at the end of the road, we have this horizon, maybe also Kantian horizon, of a cosmopolitan peace. Sustainable means peaceful. So we are back to that kind of enlightenment agenda of using knowledge, science, technique, everything at our disposal, or at the disposal of our brains, to create a cosmopolitan, peaceful horizon. That's maybe what's still behind the sustainable development goals. But there's lots of contradictions in there as well. But for the moment, let's keep that idea that we are actually working not on the internet, not on this or that game design or game conception, but actually we are in a struggle for the existence of a peaceful humanity. So we are, this is, as I mentioned, it's 25 years in the making, and it's really hard. It goes from project to project, from pilot project to pilot project. Very difficult to scale up, very difficult to engage in dialogues with policy makers, with entrepreneurs, with the industry, regulators. Very, very difficult because we are actually swimming against the stream. Everything is streaming upon us, and it's very difficult to create something that is actually bottom up, inspired by, what would that be? A common understanding? Would that be an open source commons environment? And we know that capitalism is still there, it's still around. So it's a total, almost total failure of open source systems, except for the case of China now, that is promising at least support for open AI ecosystems. We can go back to that issue that's on the news right now. How the AI systems in the US and in China, they are completely different from that perspective. One is actually a capitalist endeavor, proprietary systems, while the other seems to be really more open or social or even socialist. Well, anyway, that's the underlying discussion here. We want games to be part of an emerging ecosystem that is open and that allows our communities to engage with sustainable development goals peacefully. So we focus on a youth engagement in vulnerable territories, like the Quilombo. Quilombo is the original name for a community of former slaves or slaves that were able to left their condition, and then they traveled deep into the hinterlands and created these areas that became important environmental assets because they developed their own forms of life that are nature friendly. And so Quilombo is both an icon for struggle, for resistance, for a different perspective on the relations between community, society, nature, power, and all that. In our project, the Intelligent Quilombo, we also engage not only with former slaves or descendants of former black slaves, but also with people living in slums. It's a lot in Brazil, and native peoples, indigenous communities as well. So we've done that. I'll be back to this later on. Quilombo Inteligente actually was our pilot project for the Wi-Fi platform. So we've been discussing with these kids, teenagers, and of course, elder as well, AI games, what creative education could mean, what kind of decolonial and community-based innovation are we able to bring forward. So there's all these discussion as well of decoloniality. What kind of sustainability are we talking about? Is that a sustainable colonial system, or is it actually a resilient decolonial strategy? So the platform itself is work in progress, of course, but these are the ideas, and I'm quite, let's say, still hopeful that we'll be able to arrive at some important reversible stage. But of course, we are at the crest of a very difficult moment where all the forces of reaction and fascism are really there, working to deconstruct, in the bad sense of the word, actually to destroy all these resistance and democratic and decolonial projects that have been in the making for the last 10, 15 years. So the Quilombo Inteligente platform, I'll be back to there later. One important issue here, my background is in economics and social sciences, so I've been, before becoming, let's say, a researcher on digital, I was a standard economist with an E, not with an I. I worked with finance, banking, economic policy. So I have this obsession with money. What does it mean? What is actually behind value? What are the theories of value? What's important when we are discussing values? Not only from an economic perspective, but also as maybe a Nietzschean perspective. Andrea was talking about this when we met in Brazil. She delivered a wonderful lecture about the Nietzschean playful perspective. So the transvaluation of values, is that in any way possible with games? Would new forms of value or new forms of valuation be one way towards the recreation of our value frameworks? Or would maybe games help us, game monetization, or games as gamification, not as gambling. Would that be one way towards alternative economic systems? Well, that's the idea of the peace coin, and we can go further into that later. Actually, I met these guys in Japan, and it was a conference on an international research association on complementary currencies and issues related to alternative economics, circular economics, sustainable economics, etc. And I met these guys. They were developing the peace coin, which is actually a cryptocurrency evolving into the blockchain. So we are working with that, digital tokens that we are using during our events, right? Trying to educate people to the idea that, you know, it's not just the dollar or the real or the euro, but, well, there is a technology out there that's being used for crypto speculation. A dollar, Trump dollar, things like that. So why not a peace coin? I mean, conceptually, is that different? And how that relates eventually to, you know, new forms of control as well. So yes, we already totally screen through our internet usage, our credit cards, everything. So we are totally scanned. So why not a bottom-up, peaceful and sustainable monetary system where we have more control? Well, that it's basically the same as asking for another internet or another society, but it's a tool. It's interesting to play with these tools and check whether, you know, they are totally lost for emancipation, or maybe they could be elements of a new form of education for values, for what kind of things we actually associate to using a currency, to using a coin. So yes, there is a reward here. There's some kind of behavioral stimulus for social impact activities. That's also a very important discussion. Is that a new form of behavioral science? What's involved in creating these tokens or connecting digital tokens to other kinds of icons that express or represent our imagined futures? So, gamification of value exchange, digital currencies as tools for solidarity and cultural production. Yeah, that's quite good as a summary. So we connect games to broader experiments in blockchain, DAOs, and social currencies. So the idea of a DAO here is also important. Decentralized, autonomous organizations. Again, the idea of an autonomy, how autonomous can be an agent, an intelligent agent. What's the limit to this autonomy that is being, in a way, just, you know, rolled over ourselves by these companies, these huge big tech corporations? Or is that still a possibility of a social organization which is based on decentralized usage of the blockchain, decentralized voting, and actually exchanges that are subject not to the interests of capital accumulation, but other kinds of targets and goals? So that takes us again to democracy, democratic engagement. We have gaming democracy. It's a bad translation for one of the games that has been awarded by the Games for Change Latin America, Pitch for Change. Actually, it's called the electoral zone. Very much linked to gerrymandering and actually education for voting. And it's out there. It's in its third stage of development. Also, educational games linked to United Nations initiatives. And I'll talk a little bit about this later, but I have a box here that I will play with you online later on. This is the Purposium. Challenges of Justice. So this was published by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Wow, super serious. It was an international contest for non-digital games. And this was one of the games that was selected. Here you have the logo for the City of Knowledge, the graduate program on humanities, and the Rebel, one Brazilian research network on games. And I'll play this with you in a moment, but it's actually a card game. So we are not dealing just with the digital. Actually, we do want to connect with bodies and minds in territories. It may be the classroom, but it can also be like a community, a group, a social movement, whatever, discussing what are our purposes in terms of fighting for justice, and what is the importance of justice as a requisite for peace and development. So it's not just about peace and abstract or development goals as a list of goals, but what is the justice, the idea of responsibility, accountability, governance, etc., behind whatever we do. So I'll be back to the game in a moment. Of course, this requires interdisciplinary research. So I've been teaching after like almost 30 years, teaching economics in faculties and departments of economics in different universities. I switched with the internet from economics to actually developing interdisciplinary research. And since 1999, when I started the City of Knowledge project, I've been with the Institute of Advanced Studies, then the School of Communication and Arts, Department of Film, Radio, and TV. I wanted to shift into that because I realized that the internet is an audiovisual system, and just discussing markets and the laws of the market, supply and demand, that wouldn't be enough. I had to actually engage and immerse myself into this audiovisual environment, and then the Faculty of Philosophy and Humanities and Literature at USP as well. So I'm kind of moving around from communication and arts to philosophy and humanities, and doing this digital brainstorming at the Institute of Advanced Studies, proposing and joining other people who are really, really worried about artificial intelligence and other technological development. So we've been engaging as well last 5 years more intensely with health issues, especially mental health. So we are right now engaged with a research group that deals with actually gambling versus gaming, the differences, and I'll be back to that in a moment as well. We have a really, really serious problem, social problem with bets and gambling in Brazil now, as in so many places. So yeah, this is the applied dimension, creative economy or creative industries, education, of course, and health. And since I'm teaching at the graduate program on humanities, rights, and other legitimacies, I'm quite interested in philosophy, critical theory. That's why I keep going back to Kant and pre-Kantian, post-Kantian issues, because, of course, we are framing these games as epistemological tools, ways of producing knowledge, not just content. That's perfect. Thank you, Chad. That was perfect. Big picture. So my contribution can be summarized as turning games into platforms for social innovation, yes. Linking local communities, favelas, slums, youth cultural groups with global networks, correct. Combining technology, art, economy, and politics, correct. And advancing a vision where play equals method for transformation. And if you want, I can map these activities into your UAIFAI economia framework. Okay, that's not what we want right now. So yes, so let me stop sharing this and share just another overview of what I've been doing, just to let you know with more detail what's been going on. That's really started, wow, in 2000, year 2000. That was still the social democratic government of Fernando Henrique Cardoso. And the Ministry of Science and Technology in Brazil, back there, organized this green book on society of information in Brazil. So I was part of this group, about 150 specialists from all over the country. We had these working groups that by discussing with detail what kind of policy was needed so that Brazil would enter the society of information. And it really flopped, of course. We became less and less capable of actually engaging with sustainable and consistent public policies. What came instead was the accelerating privatization of telecommunications infrastructure and everything that is a result of that. So to this day, we can say we are like 25 plus years of private telecommunication networks, and that's a major, major blockage to public policies, to designing information and communication systems that actually are subject to regulatory frameworks that put priority on what we want: justice, health, education, of course, employment, income. Everything was discussed back there 25 years ago to no result. After this amazing meeting came Lula. Wow, the Workers' Party. Now, we thought, now with the Workers' Party in power, with Lula, well, we will finally, revert that kind of privatization trend and create a true public sphere for communication, information sharing, knowledge production, blah, blah, blah. It never happened. It was just, strengthening the privatization process, not only in telecom, but also in health, education, security, whatever. That's where we are now. No wonder, it's been a mess all around with terrible social implications, not to mention economic and financial policies in this country. So this is a timeline. So it really started with the City of Knowledge at the Institute of Advanced Studies, 99. At the early period of the Lula government, we did our first international conference, Global Knowledge, Center and Periphery in the Society of Knowledge. This was organized by the Council on Economic and Social Development of the Presidency, partnering with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Communications. Wow, lots of hope. It was huge, more than 2,000 not only citizens. I mean, this was at the site of the Social and Economic Development Council of the Presidency. So these 2,000 people were people coming from all ministries. It was like, now we have a goal. Now we have an agenda, and it relates to the Society of Knowledge. I got a really small grant from one of the state banks, and we did our first experiment with social currency in the Northeast. Okay, it was a success and then a failure because we never actually had a peaceful and stable leftist government in Brazil. Despite Lula now being its third term and running for his fourth term, it's really tragic because in a sense, it's we weren't able to develop alternatives, and the alternatives became more and more to the right. So from the institute, I jumped to the Department of Film, Radio, and TV in 2003, 2005. In 2006, I published this paper, Principles of Economics, or Princípios de Economia, and just published in graduate programs, communication, graduate programs in communication. It's a Brazilian association. They published in 2006, and it was, I just forgot, just published in order to, because this was an insight. Oh, it's not an economy, it's an economy. So let me publish that. And I published it just for the sake of, it's not really like, let's say, scientific paper in a sense. It's just an essay. But I wanted to put it on the record that, like, I invented, because when I had this insight, I Googled it, economics, economia. The word simply did not exist. I was thrilled. Like, wow, kind of, inventing a new word, so important, and it does not exist. So I rushed to the computer, wrote this kind of paper, and it was accepted and it was published. As a result, later on, I mean, like about 10 years later, I am in Paris visiting for a conference or something. I went to the National Library. I do the search, and there are 3 books with economy as a title. I said, wow, who are these guys? So I found out they had created an Institut de l'Économie in Paris. Amazing, amazing. So this is also connected to this internationalization process, engaging since 2010 with Games for Change in New York, but also, with the Fondation Maison des Sciences de l'Homme in Paris, the King's College in London, other partners, traveling a lot to Japan, to Europe, to the US, etc. And so it's a success made out of succession of failures, or maybe it's a failure made out of, so many successful mini or pilot projects. But I came back to the Institute of Advanced Studies in 2016 in order to go deeper into the idea of social or creative currencies. So we also did a workshop on creative currencies as playful currencies with the support of the National Bank of Economic and Social Development. So I've been always very close to actually implementing these ideas as policy, but only almost close. Never got there, either because the context was not favorable, or because the authorities did not have the understanding, or there were other priorities. So it's a long history of success and failure, and it depends on my mood to actually feel like a successful research fellow with interesting ideas, or just one more idealist that is looking for digital emancipation rather than digital inclusion. It's not being subject to the digital culture as a slave, but of putting the technology, putting the idea of information as the new reference for value, etc., at the service of public interest. But, well, here we are with the Agence Universitaire de la Francophonie, AUF, doing the Quilombo Inteligente. So this is just part of my trajectory as a journalist as well. Been working about this, writing about this since, you see, this 2003. Networks are engines for social synapses. Wow, like 3 years ago. Or like in 2005, digital emancipation and knowledge networks. I was, trying to make my point in the public sphere, in the newspapers. I was working as a journalist as well. I had all the space I needed or I wanted to know result. Well, these are the books in this trajectory. This was the first mapping of the Brazilian industry of digital games, also done by the National Bank of Social and Economic Development. Wow, we had that. And this was like 10 years ago. And after that, nothing. The bank did nothing. So the subject is there. The idea of, actually implementing policies is there. Some policies are in paper implemented, but as a matter of fact, we don't move on. The interests of the industry, the privatization process, and other political issues, of course, block this process of bringing Brazil into what, in my perspective, would be a very advantageous position as a global so-called leader in peaceful implementation of digital culture policies, with games, creative interactions at center stage. So this is just, transdisciplinarity, of course, One book, Economy Introduction to the Digital Critique of Industrial and Financial Economics, that was published by the Federal University in Bahia. And for the last 6 years, I've been doing this. Sorry, time is starting to run out. I'd like to leave about 2 minutes. Okay, I'll wrap it up. So this is the radio program I've been doing. Actually, it's a weekly program. I've been doing this for like 5 years, 350 programs. Yeah, so I've already talked about that. UNESCO also. We did this project with UNESCO. Let's do a global gamification of sustainable development goals linked to digital literacy, critical thinking, creativity, literacy, intercultural, citizenship, knowledge and sustainability. When I got this project, I said, wow, now we have the MIL, the meal clicks, will be, a global program for children to engage with content related to human rights and all that. Yeah, it was not beyond the event sponsored by UNESCO. These are some of the books I said, and I found out recently, since I was in Paris, like Peter Sandy, Le Supermarché de Visible et cette économie. Michel Vol, Economie, he created the Institut de l'Économie. I met him in Paris. Unfortunately, he passed away about a year ago. And he wrote the Wikipedia article acknowledging that I created the economy. Then in Australia, economy towards the political economy of images. So I see games, gamification, the use of game design strategies as part of the emergence of this economy. And here, the UAIFAI Quilombo Inteligência at the Institute of Advanced Studies. We've been doing this through 2025. There's lots of information in our website, Quilombo Inteligente. And we are doing now a graduate course along with the Museum of the Slums. That means 1,000 students enrolled as listeners, 60 regular students, moving to the Institute of Advanced Studies now as a research group with 40 plus research projects, and reaching out in Brazil 187 municipalities. And this is like the development or the implementation of the platform, along with the Institute of Advanced Studies and a graduate program about racism or racisms and fundamentalisms in the age of economics, starting with Franz Fanon and his critical images and our critical images in digital technology. So this is where we are right now. And the university bulletin already publishing about this 1 year ago, like we're launching a collaborative social network focused on research and innovation, partnership with the Agence Universitaire de la Francophonie, etc., etc. So yes, let me stop here. Yeah, I wanted really to share this broad view of what I've been doing research about. Of course, there are many topics here. What kind of philosophers, what kind of inspiration, how to use different technologies. But I hope this was enough to, stimulate your curiosity so that it's really seen as a kickoff of our collaboration in the future. Thank you so much.
Gilson, thank you. Wow. I think if anybody isn't blown away, then I don't know. But there are lots of clapping icons going up. Okay. I very much would like people to engage with you for the last 15 minutes or so of the presentation. I've got 1,000 questions to ask you. And I think while people are gathering their thoughts, let me just sneak one in there quickly. And that is, if you look at everything you've done, it's amazing. There's so much and for so long. And what makes me feel incredibly distressed in a way is this, why is it such a battle to do socially engaged, idealistic, emancipatory, inclusive work? That the kind of work that you do, why is it so hard? Um, it's terrifying to my mind that it is. I don't know if you can answer that question, but it's in a way, it's just a kind of an initial response that this is the kind of work that ought to just run wild and smoothly and that there ought to be this incredible excitement about it. And yeah, and instead we're facing what seems to be looming disaster. Uh, do you have any thoughts on that?
What I can say from my experience, my personal experience, like 25 plus years of, battling, actually battling, is that seen from this long-term perspective, my opinion today is that privatization is the source of all evil. I
Yeah.
mean, it's there are so many words for that, neoliberal policies, but as a matter of fact, it's just transfers of wealth and assets from the public to private interests. Many forms, selling state assets or making room from the exploitation of natural resources that are a collective asset and turning that like rare earths and things like that, water, etc., transferring water management, everything to the private sector, as if this would be a cure or as if this would be a solution for corruption, for underdevelopment and things like that. So once you have this consensus, which is internationally funded by the IMF, starting with the debt crisis, because part of the solution, so to speak, solution to the debt crisis in the 80s was destroy the state because you have to save for interest payments. So you have to sell everything you have in order to pay to the banks. And part of this, of course, is privatization. Privatization results immediately in more inequality because you are destroying not only public property, you are actually reducing individual and social rights in health, education, uh, national security, etc., etc. So privatization takes us to more inequality, and inequality is the birthplace of violence.
Mm,
So it's like a vicious circle because violence then creates a kind of a vacuum of public authority because there is the widespread perception that there is no social policy, which is true, and it requires more violence, police, and all sorts of violence. Most importantly, maybe symbolic violence, like never mind if you don't have a health plan, if you don't have a retirement plan, never mind. It's just a matter of being an entrepreneur. Or, you see all, well, on the one hand, crime, of course, it expands enormously, drug lords and all that. It's a direct result of the absence of the state in the peripheries of our cities. So it's drug lords that rule these territories where the majority of the population is subject to no water, no health, no retirement, of precariat. So it's not the
mm,
proletariat, it's the precariat. It's a form of violence. So this form of violence also creates more space for identity politics. Like you don't have income, you don't have a job, you don't have any right, but you can bet in your identity. So I see also identitarianism, so to speak, as a risk in a sense of uh, in a sense of actually creating some sort of adaptation to the absence of public policies. You focus on your personal identity. And there's, on the one hand, identity politics, and on the other, religion. So the expansion of so-called new Pentecostalism, oh, what a word, Pentecostalism, evangelicals. It's in Brazil, amazing. And in the last 10 years, this agreement, this kind of joint venture between these churches and organized crime. So it's a new reality. It's a new reality where if you want to enter into a slum, either you have to talk to a religious leader or a drug lord. Where's the police? Oh, the police is corrupt. There is no public policy. There's no public sphere. Amazing. Habermas, Jürgen Habermas, just left us. No, he was for decades trying to move on with this kind of enlightenment heritage. Let's improve our communication strategies or our ability to, discuss publicly or to reconstruct the public sphere. He was talking out of the Nazi experience in the Second World War. So I see this as a cycle: privatization, inequality, violence, and then identity politics that do not stress on the public sphere. They stress on individual traits like, well, I'm black, I'm a woman, I'm gay, I'm this, I'm that, I'm Brazilian, I'm Islamic, I'm Jewish, I'm Catholic. It's amazing. It's not a cultural renaissance. It's actually a regression to pre-individualistic values, so to speak. So yeah, maybe Nietzsche would help here as well in terms of trying to, devise what kind of values are being transvalued in what direction. So it's a long discussion, but turning everything private, I think, is the main issue here.
Okay, thank you. Whew. Yeah, again, massive problems. Let's focus in a little. There are some questions on the chat. Hashila, do you want to speak to your question?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Hi, Gilson. I'm Andrea's partner in crime in the chair. My question is, where or how do you see socially conscious games intersecting with commercial digital games or gamers?
Well, yes. Let me share. This is our latest project within the UAIFAI project at the Institute of Advanced Studies. This was a first, really a first. We did a game jam at the Institute of Advanced Studies sponsored by Roblox. What else could we dream of? And probably the largest game design of sorts company in the world, $60 billion worth. And they have lots of problems with kids, with harassment, online harassment, teenagers' mental health, and all sorts of criminal issues actually within their ecosystem, their gaming environment. So they call the Games for Change. Brazil, India, and Korea are major markets for them. So they called Games for Change and said, look, we want to do game jams that foster, positive connections and well-being. Could you help us? Because we all know that Games for Change is for that. So would you do that? So they called me and said, oh, would you do that in Brazil? I said, okay, I can do it. So this $60 billion company comes with their team, etc. They have their own agenda. And I said, okay, this will be an exercise of dialogue with the corporate sector. And of course, it's a huge company. So for the kids, it's also an opportunity for professionalization, for job creation, training, and all that. So we did it, and it was a success. We just finished that. It was in the beginning of April, with $3,000 as awards for the three best games. We did it at the Institute of Advanced Studies. It was amazing. And then I kind of, tried to open an agenda with the Roblox guys here in Brazil about research and a more sustainable long-term cooperation for that kind of agenda, not just for, social washing their brands, but actually engaging with research and the more durable, more sustainable cooperation. So I'm still, we're not 1 month from the event, but I'm still waiting for them to give any sign. Of course, what they're doing, they did the Roblox Jam in Brazil, India, and South Africa, and then they're still running the global jam with that kind of agenda. So yeah, I think this is a very good question. How do we engage with these people who are actually commercial oriented, big companies, big tech? Are they really capable, or is it possible in their capitalistic logic to engage with social issues beyond the social washing or greenwashing? A big question. I think that as a citizen, I think it's my responsibility to be open to dialogue. So it's a big corporation or it's the state. I mean, as far as it's a legal entity, it's my responsibility as a professor at the university, in my case, a public university, to be open to dialogue. So I'm not a radical that says, oh, I won't talk to capital because capital against labor defines everything and private interests are always bad. No, I'm quite flexible. I'm optimistic from a pragmatic perspective. I want dialogue, but it's really not easy. And Roblox is just one more experience. It's really difficult, not only to deal with commercial interests, but also with individualism, with narcissism, with the ego trips that abound starting from our campus. It's so difficult to invite fellows to a project. This is Gilson's project. I said, man, I've been doing this for 25 years. I'm about to retire. So it's not, maybe 20, 30 years ago, I was younger and I had this kind of ego. And I said, wow, I will create something and this will be my creation. But as we move on, we realize that this is an illusion. It really depends on cooperation. It really depends on the emergence of some sort of social consciousness. But then the network, wow, it's social in itself. But then, it's social, but in the sense of a multitude of individuals, a multitude of narcissisms. So it's not just the commercial interests that are challenged. I think that our way of life, the difficulty of actually experiencing collective endeavors, maybe utopias, that's also a challenge. It's as difficult to negotiate and to have a dialogue with Roblox as it is with my fellow professor that sits just one door after my office space, because each one is also under pressure for productivity and papers and all that. So it's a very perverse situation. And Andrea said, how come you still pursue that kind of agenda? That's a big issue. That's maybe a Kantian question. I mean, maybe once you leave that kind of minority, that kind of childish narcissism, and you achieve some kind of consciousness, and you realize that you're going to die, that you're spending your time, and its time is the match is about to finish, and you want to play with everyone else. And these challenges are there, be it the manager at the corporation or the fellow at the university campus. So I'm not a pessimistic, but I'm quite critical and I'm trying to not be naive.
Actually, that's a very, it's very fine line to walk between naivety and pessimism. Absolutely. We are out of time, but I just want to give Jenna a tiny little bit of response time if you can, because I think in a certain sense Gilson addressed your question, but do you have a kind of response? Well, just quick.
Yes, yes. I would, as so many other, thinkers or researchers and other people have said in the past, art, A-R-T, art. I think that art as a form, artistic lives, or the artistic experience might be that space where ideology is present, but it's not overdetermined. So
Nice.
maybe the socially conscious games can shape mainstream commercial gaming if we have some kind of artistic, poetic zeitgeist, like instead of war and death and destruction, creative. So I'm still a believer in creative arts. I'm still a believer in the creativity of the human mind. And I think that can be a bridge between private and public, between individual and collective. So between present time and a more, let's say, spiritual or not really finite perspective.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Gilson.
About the peace coins, about the peace coins, just one final word. You can find information about that on the web easily. Just Peace Coin Japan, okay? This is from Japan. So they have an org, a non-profit, and let's keep in touch. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much for, wow, I think we could go on all week, not even just all afternoon, but very exciting, and hopefully we will keep contact and yeah, make some exciting things happen in Africa too. But thanks very much for this talk. It will be on YouTube, so we will all go back to it and yeah, try and absorb as much as we can. And yes, thank you. And everybody have a wonderful weekend wherever you are in the world. And we will see you next time. Okay, all right. Cheers all. Bye.